Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mayleaf. How can you judge the complexity of a tea? What are the skills that you need to learn and practice in order to assess how complex a tea is and whether or not that level of complexity suits your taste? I've done a video already about hedonic complexity. Hedonic means pleasure, complexity we all can understand. So the pleasure that we derive from complexity, and generally as complexity increases, our pleasure or our sense of pleasure for that food, drink, scent, piece of art, piece of music increases, and it reaches a point where there's excessive complexity and it's just becoming too noisy, in which case your pleasure starts to go down. And as you start to build experience in tasting, in tea, or whatever it might be that you're enjoying, generally our desired level of complexity, that optimal level of complexity to get the most amount of pleasure, goes up. So we seek more and more complex teas in this instance. But you do have the general character of the tea. And sometimes the general of the character of the tea is that it's a tea which is meant to speak of purity, of lightness, of brightness. And so in the first episode, I demonstrated how you could still look for complexity within a tea that is all about pureness and brightness. And I tasted Snow Phoenix or Snowflake Dansong. In this video, I'm going the other end of the spectrum. I'm going to be taking a tea which is very robust, very rich, very processed in the sense that it's gone through lots of different processing with the humans that made it. We're going to be drinking a Wui Yen Cha, specifically fresh in cookie fruit barrel. I've done a video about cookie fruit barrel before. I'll stick a link in the description below, so we're not going to be talking too much specifically about this tea. But what I want to do today is to talk about how you can better discern complexity and the importance of time, or the temporal aspect of tasting, which is not often talked about and I think is key to understanding complexity, because complexity is not just about the singular experience. I drink this tea, how complex is it? It's about also how the tea reveals itself over time with all of your senses, with smell, with taste, with texture. How it evolves over time is also a big part of complexity. So that temporal aspect is very important. And as I said, I don't think it's discussed enough. So what I'm going to be doing today is basically explaining to you the way that I view the different phases of how you experience a tea. Now, we've already got our 10-step tasting protocol. Eyes, dry leaf, nose, dry leaf, so the smell of the dry leaf, nose, wet leaf, the color of the liquor, so how it looks, the texture in the mouth, so the mouth feel, the taste, the aftertaste and finish, the aroma of the empty cup, the look of the wet leaves, and finally the body sensation. So we've got our 10-step tasting protocol. But what I'm going to be doing now is zooming in specifically to we're not going to be doing anything to do with the visual side of it, although you could incorporate that as well in terms of complexity. But what we're doing is just focusing on smell and taste and texture in the mouth. And we're going to be zooming in on those, and we're going to be talking about the temporal points, so the phases of how you experience those different sensory inputs. Right, let's get into it. So let's first start with aroma. So with aroma, you'll see in our 10-step tasting protocol, you've got nose, dry leaf. But you can really split that up, and you should split that up. And one of the frustrations that I always have when I'm doing tasting on the videos with you is that I'm conscious of time and I don't want to make my videos too much longer than half an hour. And so therefore a tea session, usually for me, a proper tea session would last much longer than half an hour, because I'm going through a more temporal appreciation of the tea to understand its complexity. So we start with a warm pot. Okay. First time smelling this tea. So, butterscotch, some asphalty kind of like tarry quality, which is really nice. It sort of sends a buzzy sensation. I'm picking up baked tangerine skins, casks, dark rum, sweet, dark agave syrup. So that's the smell of the dry leaf. And normally I would then move on, right? Let's give it a rinse and let's smell the wet leaf. But really, if I was doing this without the cameras on, I would be focusing on how does that change as the pot cools. So this is the temporal aspect of it, because what we want, and this is going to be the theme running through this video, is that we want change, because change equals complexity. So in the first video, I talked about just generally the richness of complexity, how much was going on in the leaf, but I didn't really focus on the temporal aspect. In this video, I'm really wanting to stress the point that great teas will evolve during the session. Now, it's only been a little bit of time, but let's see. Because as it cools, I'm picking up more brightness. I'm picking up a little bit of like a cherry varnish. I'm picking up a little bit of cherry in general. I'm picking up a bit of raisins. So it gives me brighter, fruitier notes than when it was warm. And you can continue to do this. I'm not going to, but you can continue to do this. You could leave this now. Let it cool completely. See how that changes, right? It's definitely lighter, definitely brighter. Not lighter, brighter, more fruity. Okay, so the same applies with aroma. Sorry, stuck a bit of leaf stuck to my nose. The same applies to the wet leaf. Warm wet leaf, like this, is going to hopefully reveal very different aromatics compared to as it starts to cool. And I stress this point many times in the video. When you're smelling, take your time, let it cool down, see how it shifts. So first hit. Oh, whoa. Yeah, a touch of like barnyard, farmy, like hay and like a little bit sort of animal, not to the point of being like too funky, just in the background. And then also that varnished wood is really popping to the surface as well. I'm getting that really sort of bracing, I talked about asphalt before, but like, you know, that sort of tarry moving into cherry cough syrup note, sort of medicinal, bracing, striking on the nose. Like cherries again, dried cherries, cherry blossom. So it's a bit flowery. I don't know what cherry blossom is. It's sort of like what I would imagine cherry blossom to smell like. Yeah, sakura. Yeah, a sakura note is there. Okay, now let it cool down. Let it reveal different aromatics because of the temperature. Interestingly, moving more biscuity. Getting some of those oat cookies, oat butter cookies with like studded with little currants in them. Touch of a touch of like amaretto, like a liquor, like is it cherry liquor? A little cherry liquor, a bit of plum wine. Yeah, like a cherry kirsch, plum wine. Again, moves slightly fruitier, but I'm also picking up more creams actually. Yeah, so that butter biscuits. Moving to as if I've taken that that dark agave syrup or even maple syrup, and I've mixed it in with like, I don't know, like an eggnog kind of quality to it. You know, it's like buttery, but buttery and milky, but not milk. Sort of eggnog quality. Again, it's shifting and it's shifting and it continues to shift. And as I smell it now, as it's even cooler, I'm picking up more flowery notes. So complexity of aroma is shifting, or the complexity of the aroma is revealing itself through time. Right. Now we're gonna brew it up. And I'm going to talk to you, we're going to keep talking about aroma a little bit because we're going to talk about retronasal aroma. So with aroma, you've got the orthonasal and the retronasal when it's in your mouth and you breathe out. So orthonasal, we're talking about nose dry leaf when it's warm, nose dry leaf when it's cool, nose wet leaf when it's warm, nose wet leaf when it's cool. So we're starting to really dive into the temporal aspect of that 10-step tasting. And then you're going to have the retronasal aroma that comes, but that's going to change with every single infusion. With every single infusion, you might get slightly different retronasal aromatics. And also, very important, the orthonasal will change through infusions too. So now it's had its first infusion, it might smell different. In this case, it smells a bit more citrusy. It's like a little bit more of that tangerine peel is coming through, but also straight up like a bit of a lemon juice, lemony note is happening. And these are the kinds of notes that I never really get to talk about when we're doing our tastings, because I'm very focused on trying to give you like a snapshot of each phase of the 10-step tasting. But when you are assessing teas in terms of quality or just your sense of enjoyment out of teas, the temporal aspect is so important because it, again, reflects hedonic complexity. Right. Cheers, everybody. Let's do texture first, because believe it or not, the mouthfeel also has a temporal aspect. I could split the mouthfeel up, and I do. Whenever I'm doing a tasting, I split, mentally I'm splitting my mouthfeel up into opening, middle, and closing. What is the texture as soon as it hits my mouth, then the middle, and then the end? What is the shift? What is the transformation? Because that shift, that arc, that show from a beginning, middle, and end is also representative of hedonic complexity to me. If I taste a tea and it's just thick, okay, thick. But if it's thick and then it shifts in my mouth and maybe splits and becomes watery and then moves to like a smooth, oily finish, that's more complex, more exciting for me. Here we go. Thick. So in this case, the opening, thick, jellied. The middle texture is vaporous. It's like the thickness doesn't dissipate to wateryness. It like evaporates to a vaporousness, which is what I look for as a complexity in Yencha in general. And then the finish, I'm not talking about the finish, so I shouldn't use it, the closing texture. I'm not talking about finish because that's a separate thing. The closing texture is like mineral and crunchy. So it's thick to start, and then the middle is like vaporous and foggy in my mouth, and then it cascades in the closing texture to be crunchy and mineral, sort of cascading of minerality. And that, for me, that arc, that show, that change represents hedonic complexity to me. It's something that I look for in terms of the texture. Now, afterwards, we can focus on finish. How does it leave my mouth in terms of finish? Well, I'm getting a tingling and bright and fresh quality to the sides of my tongue, to the underside of my tongue. I'm getting a slight grip to the backside of my tongue, up to my upper palate at the back. I'm getting like a little chalky note on the middle of my tongue, and generally a mineral quench down my throat. So I'm getting all of that. That's the last, but that's the finishing texture. So you've got opening, you've got middle, you've got closing, then you've got finishing texture. So all of those we would normally throw under just mouthfeel and finish. Again, important to dive in, go deeper, zoom in and understand this temporal aspect. And of course, just like with smell, you're getting the difference that's going to happen of those textures as the tea infuses and over the session, and even after you have finished drinking your tea. What is the finishing texture in the tea? How does it shift? How does it change over infusions? Before we move into taste, which clearly I need to do, we're also going to go back to aroma. So retronasal aroma is different from orthonasal aroma. You're getting more humidity because it's humid in your mouth with the tea compared to here. So all of those notes, this amazing cherry varnish casks, butter cookies, and cherries and plum wine, no, cherries and cherry kirsch and a little bit of plum and some flowers. Retronasal, so I'm going to put this in my mouth, I'm going to breathe out through my nose. So with that humidity, things become muted. Some of those top notes get taken away. But by doing so, it clarifies some of the milky notes. Cooked milk, panna cotta, touch of spice, sort of cinnamon note. Now, the blurring between what is aroma and what is taste is clearly very complex, because so much of what I define as taste is also retronasal aroma. So I recognize that there's a lot of blur here. So let's move into the taste. Again, what I want to do here is split the tasting between opening, middle, and closing taste. And then we'll deal with aftertaste. So just like texture, opening, middle, closing, finish texture, opening, middle, and closing, and then aftertaste. Okay, so let's go. Okay, opening taste, lots of the woods, lots of that varnished wood note. With some floral embroidery on top. Middle, I hit clays and milks. I'm seeing sort of like clay workshops, but like sort of the raw clay filled with like milk. It's just milky and clay-like. Let's brew it up again. The panna cotta is there. It's all in that middle note. So it's interesting, and I don't know. Well, it makes sense in a way. The opening taste tends to be more about the bright, sharper notes. Maybe it's related to more of those lighter, bright, volatile releases going up your nose, etc. But I'm getting that hit, that bright hit of the varnish, of the cherries, of the flowers and woods, which I know you sort of associate with being sort of bassy, but actually, that sort of casky, antique wood is actually quite a high, bright note. And then middle note is that milky, rounded quality of the taste and the aromatics. And as I said, they are blurred. I know what my aftertaste is, but I want to talk about the closing taste before I talk about the aftertaste. Again, there is a closing taste. Now, one of the most common reasons why I reject any tea, but Yancha is a perfect example of this, is despite the fact that it's a high quality tea, great terroir, well produced, blah, 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 really top notch tea, what I'll find is they hit certain phases of my taste and aroma. So I'll get that initial aroma, banging, lots and lots of richness. I'll get an initial taste, wow. But the middle and the closing taste, the middle and closing taste tends to be the one, and the middle and closing aroma tend to be the ones that just fall short a little bit. Same with lots of teas. I mean, you know, so many teas have impact, but do they have complexity over time? Big, big quality marker for me in terms of what differentiates pinnacle from top-notch specialty tea. And I've got a lot of aftertaste. Okay, I'll say it. I'm getting a lot of aftertaste. I'm getting like a persimmon, mangosteen, lots of mangosteen in the finish. Lots of fruits in the finish. Yeah, persimmon and mangosteen, those are probably the two that I would pick out. Right. Now let's go back to taste and let's focus on this beginning, middle, closing taste. That procession of flavors. Okay, so like I said, at the beginning, getting the varnish, getting the woods, getting the flowers, gardenia, whiter flowers. Middle, getting the cookies, more milky, more panna cotta, more of the creamier notes. Then the closing taste is definitely more of the roast, more of the bake of those cookies. Yeah, more of the bake of the cookies. That's pretty much like the predominance of it. I'm getting like baked cookie note in it, which is lovely. So I'm getting all of that. And then the aftertaste is a twang of mangosteen, a twang of, I want to say cannabis, but yeah, a little bit of cannabis, mangosteen, and then persimmon. Now, after you get to the aftertaste, after the aftertaste, you get huigan, you get the returning sweetness. That's another aspect of taste of which I'm getting tons and tons of returning sweetness as well. So when I throw everything under what's the finish, it's really like, you know, there's a lot going on there. And as always, that's going to change over time, over infusions, but also as your mouth starts to cool, you will notice differences in the aromatics. You will notice differences in the taste. You will notice difference in the texture. So there's so much information that's going on that's continuously changing. Also with aroma, I forgot to mention, smell of empty cup. Again, thrown on our 10-step tasting as what's the smell of the empty cup, of which, again, little orangey note. So it's sort of like panna cotta or custard with a little grating of orange zest, just a little bit, just to give it brightness and lightness. But now let's let the cup cool. Again, there's going to be change. Hopefully there's going to be change. Now, in a tea that is less complex, that has less hedonic complexity, for my taste, I will note that there isn't much shift through the different phases of the smell, the different phases of the taste, the different phases of the texture. Oh, okay, yeah, different. Pomelo. Pomelo custard. So yes, you could say similar, orange grated over panna cotta, pomelo custard, but it is different. It's got a more light, airy note to it. And I'm picking up again a bit of that clay, a bit of craft paper. It's just shifting and changing. So if we are going to sort of bring this all together, with hedonic complexity, you've got just the natural hedonic complexity, or natural, the intrinsic hedonic complexity of the richness of the compounds in the tea, and how that complexity matches with the character that the tea is trying to express. We talked about that in the last video. Just how much is going on, right? But you also need to factor in the temporal aspect of judging complexity by seeing the development of a tea and how it shifts in terms of the experience that it gives you. Shifts from a very short-term level in terms of, the smell of the dry leaf when it's warm compared to the smell of the dry leaf when it's cool, but then the shift throughout the session as it infuses and as time goes on. And if I'm going to give you a little list, then you should focus on nose. So let's just say aroma now. Aroma of dry leaf when warm, dry leaf when cool, wet leaf when warm, wet leaf when cool, wet leaf through infusions, retronasal through infusions, smell of empty cup when warm, smell of empty cup when cool. Also, I would say you've got to always be sniffing the leaves, so smell of wet leaf through infusions as well. So you can see there's loads of aromatic information that you can be gathering during a session. With taste, you've got the opening taste, you've got the middle taste, you've got the closing taste. All of that is happening whilst the tea is in your mouth and just when you swallow. Then you've got the aftertaste, how it leaves your mouth tasting after you've swallowed. And then you've got the returning taste, that returning sweetness that builds over time. And all of that shifts over the infusions and over the session, way past you finishing your tea session. Also, very important to know, which I forgot to say before, is tasting. Just like with smelling, you want to taste the tea at different temperature. So the taste of the tea when it's hot, the taste of the tea when it's warm, the taste of the tea when it's cool, all of that extra information can build your concept or your appreciation of the complexity of a tea. Then you've got texture. Again, you can split this up into opening texture, middle texture, and closing texture, which is essentially the mouthfeel when the liquor hits your mouth and as it sort of moves around your mouth and after you've swallowed, all of the different aspects of the texture and how it transforms and changes and develops. Then you've got the finish, what we call the finish, which is how the tea leaves you. And again, that develops over time and develops over infusions and develops way after you've finished drinking, how it leaves your mouth feeling in terms of texture. So as you can see, there are just so many sensory inputs when you start to factor in time into that 10-step tasting protocol. There are so many inputs that all feed into your judgment and your assessment of how complex a tea is and whether or not that complexity meets with your preferred level of complexity in tea. I hope that this video and the previous one gives you a better understanding of hedonic complexity, and I hope that you start to apply this to your tea appreciation, but also to your appreciation of all food and drink. That's it, tea heads. Check out our other videos, taste our teas wherever you are in the world by browsing mayleaf.com, and come visit us if you're ever in London. Other than that, I'm Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags. Keep drinking the pinnacle stuff and spread the word, because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.